everything that he has said. Let's move to the Bible now for a nice discussion about Numbers chapter number 31 verse number 18, which of course is going to be a difficult verse for my honorable friend, and of course I use the term loosely here, to explain where Moses is told to go into the town, and he is take the young girls for yourself. Now, what young girls is he talking about here? When you look at the Babylonian Talmud, which is actually exegetes this particular verse, it's talking about prepubescent girls. So Moses is being instructed to take prepubescent girls for yourself as captives. Now, the idea is this: I want to know of a single verse of the Quran or a single hadith where prepubescent girls are told to be taken as captives in this manner. In fact, not only this, but if they believe that Jesus is God, because he is part of the Trinity, and therefore he's actually the author of the Old Testament as well, isn't he? Because he's God and he's inseparable from the rest of the Trinity, right? So of course, you have a double problem here. Jesus Christ, therefore, is the one that is commanding Moses to go and take captives, which are girls, for himself in chapter 31 verse 18 of Numbers. So this refutes the secondary claim that he had, that Jesus was completely disassociated from these slaves. So you have two things here. You have a complete refutation of the fact that there's not an emancipatory discourse in the Quran, which there is, and then you have a charge which I'm putting forward to this subpar opponent who will have no tools of being able to answer this question. That number one was Moses being commanded to take slaves, but also that Jesus commanded this as well.
Your turn. All right. So Mohammed here calls me subpar, but both the points he raised are really subpar. Let's look at both of them carefully. What happened in the book of Numbers? Read the verse carefully. The context corresponds to Moabites. You might have heard about a person called Balaam, acting on behalf of the Moabites, leading the nation of Israel to sexual immorality, and thereby allowing Balaam to be able to curse the nation of Israel. That's the historical context. Yeah. People who were involved in sexual immorality. With that as the backdrop, what Moses said, Muhammad, is that you need to read the verse carefully. It wasn't talking about pre-puberty. Nothing about adolescence or puberty is discussed. If you read the verse carefully, all that it would talk about is girls or ladies who did not have intimacy with men. What was he talking about? What he was talking about was those who did not lead you to sexual immorality. Those kinds of girls, I challenge Muhammad, why did you mention puberty? You need to show me that from the Bible. And the Bible talks about intimacy, number one. Number two, the Bible told to me where these ladies were taken as captives. Read the Bible carefully. What you would find is that everyone else were wiped out, whereas these were allowed to live along with the nation of Israel. That is what you would find. So find one example from the Bible. From the Bible, anywhere, old, new, anywhere you want to go to, Muhammad, and find at the end of the war where women are taken as captive to be held as slaves. Find one example and then let's talk about facts. The problem is this: Muhammad is a Muslim, and therefore clearly he is going to have his issues with his eyes. The problem, anywhere, everywhere, whatever he reads, he is going to read Islam into it. Why do I say he is reading Islam into biblical verses? Nowhere in the Bible you would see these women being taken as captives and made slaves to the people. You don't find that in the Bible, yet he reads that. And the reason for that is Muhammad allowed slavery to continue until the end of his life. Sahih al-Bukhari, you say slaves were manumitted, and that's one of the 5 pillars. Sahih al-Bukhari disagrees with you. Chapter 3, verse saying 765. 765. Sahih al-Bukhari 3, 765. Narrated Turib, the free slave of Ibn Abbas, that Maimuna bin Al-Harith told him that she manumitted a slave girl without taking the permission of the Prophet. A person comes to Muhammad and she says, I have manumitted a slave. The great Islamic Allah, who he thinks allowed Islamic Prophet to manumit slaves, do you know what he says? He says, why did you do it? Why did you let her go? Whereas the Bible dislikes the idea of people being taken as captive slaves, women especially, Muhammad here goes on to say, you would have got more reward if you had given her to one of your maternal uncles. So the idea that the so-called prophet called Muhammad, implemented manumission of slaves is a fantasy idea, doesn't correspond to reality. Let me ask you this, Muhammad.
Time's finished. All right. Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, you haven't done a good job in answering my interrogation. Actually, the verse says, take the little ones for yourself. This is chapter 31, verse 18 of Numbers. Take them for yourself. And if you're saying this doesn't imply captivity, then you'll be going against all halakhic understandings by the Jewish people who have been interpreting this for decades, in fact, actually millennia. And I will say to you once again, go back to the Jerusalem Talmud. There's two Talmuds, the Babylonian one and the Jerusalem one. Go and see what the rabbis have said in relation to this verse. They clearly understood it to mean captivity. Okay, you don't like this verse. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 2, where it talks about going the way of the Amalekites and don't leave anything alive, and even the donkey, women, children, and even the donkey. And other places it says kill everything. So actually, the injunctions in Numbers chapter 31, verse 18, are a step down, even though they mean captivity for women. They're a step down from what we find in 1 Samuel 15. Because in 1 Samuel 15, we see everybody's genocided and everybody's killed. And once again, we have to bring to the attention of the Christian community that you may say this is the Old Testament and it's something we don't want to associate with. But if you believe that Jesus is inseparable from the Trinity, then you believe that he was the author of the Old Testament, which means that at least at one point in time, he must have ordered Moses to do those genocides and kill those children and kill those animals. This is clear, and this is the understanding of the rabbis, and this is the understanding, quite frankly, of even reformers, theologians like John Calvin, who exegeted the Bible. Look at how people exegeted the Bible away from this pathetic apologism that you're finding here from these people. You'll find that it's a consistent theme, that they understood it in the way of genocide and captivity and slavery. In fact, racial slavery, which he had the audacity to accuse our Prophet of, despite the fact that he's the only man, and Islam is the only religion which categorically forbids racism. And I say that to you, get me one verse of the Bible which has the equivalent of saying racism is wrong. I can get you a hadith straight away. La fadla li Arabiyyin ala ajami. That there's no virtue over an Arab over a non-Arab, or a black man over a white man, and that the best of you are those most in virtue. Get me the equivalent of that in the Bible. We find the opposite in the Bible. Genesis chapter 9, verse number 22, we find the curse of Ham. Noah had 3 sons, and the biblical exegete said the curse of Ham was that he was cursed with black skin, curly hair, and slavery. And you see now, those who justify slavery in the transatlantic slave trade, obviously some use the Bible I will be honest, to attack slavery as well, but for the majority of those who propagated slavery, use this curse of Ham as a justification. You can't come to me and talk about slavery. You can't come to me and talk about racism. Because the Bible, there is nothing in the Bible that forbids racism. We have Jesus Christ. Is it time?
20 seconds.
20 seconds. We have Jesus Christ. In the New Testament, we have Jesus Christ shunning the Gentile woman and calling her of the dogs. This is racism, with all due respect. She's a dog because she's not a Jew. So here we find, my challenge is very clear. One verse of the Bible which categorically rejects slavery, and how do you deal with those verses that I told you in chapter 19 and chapter 9? Yeah.
Mohammed Hijab should get to know the topic first clearly. If you're going to talk about genocide as the Bible advocate, we can get to that later. The point is pretty simple, Mohammed. If you want to listen here, the point is pretty simple. The entire narration of the nation of Israel was about God redeeming a people group who were slaves, oppressed slaves. Redeeming them and giving them liberty is the entire Old Testament, the beginning of the Old Testament. And Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, soon after God brings them out, this is what he says: not to mistreat a stranger or oppress him, because you were strangers in Egypt. The challenge that I had for you is very simple, Muhammad. Find one evidence. Read to me one evidence where you find people who are brought under captivity and made slaves to live with Israel, to be slaves with Israel. You won't be able to find. In contrast, what you will find is that in the Bible, you find God advocate similar law for foreigners and for the nation of Israel. God forbidding kidnapping, i.e. taking a person against his will, whether it against his will and bringing him under captivity. You find people given rights, legal rights given to those who are working in Egypt. Exodus 22, 21, not to mistreat a stranger or oppress him. No unfair treatment, no forced marriage. Jesus says there is neither, New Testament says, Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. Excuse me, 1 second. There is neither male nor female. So if you go through the Bible, the entire story about the Bible is redemption of slaves and people being made to live as free human beings, only with obligation under God. In contrast, what do you find? In contrast, you find Muhammad.
You are free.
Excuse me. In contrast, you find Muhammad having deep racism. Muhammad thinking two black people are equal to one Arab slave. Sahih Muslim 10:3901. Sahih al-Bukhari 9:89 256. That black people were raised in heads. Muhammad himself owned black slaves. Sahih Muslim 10:3901 52334. Al-Tabari talking about black slavery, explaining it as the Africans having come from Ham and therefore ought to be enslaved. Tirmidhi Hadith 38, Muhammad says, when Allah created Adam, he stroked his right shoulder and took out a black race as if they were coals. Then he said to those who were on this right side toward paradise, and I don't care. He said to those who were on his left shoulder towards hell, and I don't care. What you find here is Muhammad saying all black people are destined to go to hell, and he doesn't even care about this. Not just this, Muhammad also considered anyone who is not a Muslim to be like cattle, like pigs, like sheep, cows, camels, and therefore no wonder you find in Islam very evil treatment of unbelievers, non-Muslims, when they are caught during a war. What happens to them? They are taken, females are taken as sex slaves. Quran, Surah 4, Ayah 3. Surah 4, Ayah 24.
Time finished. We'll get to 4:3 in the next.
Well, you want to know his mic.
All right. So,
Is he with you? Could you please ask him not to disturb in the middle of...
Yeah, no one's no one's with me here today. Everyone's coming from their own homes. Ready? All right. So he wanted something on the Bible. I gave him Deuteronomy. I gave him. You can go to Deuteronomy as well, chapter 21. That's something. Or you can also go to Numbers 31:18, and you can go to 1 Samuel. And the reason why I was mentioning genocide was because if the Bible, the biblical commandment was to kill the people, enslaving them is one notch below that. So it doesn't make sense to talk about morality when you're talking about going into an entire village of Amalekites and destroying and killing the entire population, not leaving even the animals to be alive. There is no such injunction that you will find anywhere in the Quran, and I once again challenge you to find me a single verse or a single hadith to that effect. Now, pardon?
21.
Yeah, no, it's not 21. Get it? Yeah, so now let's quickly talk about what he talked about. The hadiths that he mentioned were false. That the black people on the right and the left. This is not, the word used in that hadith was not black. The word was dark. And this is in the Quran, wujuhum muswadda, that they will have darkened faces. And in fact, ironically, this kind of language is used when men practice something called infanticide. When they kill daughters that are girls, that their faces will be darkened and so on. And there's a reprimand in the Quran for that. It doesn't mean that it's talking about the race. And he talks about two black people being the thing for one. How is that the case? When Bilal ibn Rabah was bought by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq for a high price, very, very high price, and then when he was told afterwards, he said, I would have paid even more for him. So this is nonsense what you're talking about. Bilal ibn Rabah, which everyone knows who he is, married Hala bint Auf, who was an Arab, and he became the mu'adhin of the higher echelons of that particular Islamic society. There was no mention of his race in the derogatory way whatsoever. In fact, we have a narration where Bilal was actually abused by Abu Dharr al-Ghifari because he said to him that you're the son of a black woman. The Prophet got angry and he responded by saying, what have you said? And reprimanded him and told him not to say such a thing. So all of what you're doing is distorting and completely decontextualizing that which is correct. You haven't actually had any response for that which I've mentioned, which is that Jesus Christ, who is meant to be inseparable from the body of the Trinity, he is inseparable from the Trinity. He is the one who commanded to genocide and to enslave. You'll find in Numbers 31:18, you'll find in Deuteronomy chapter 21:10, you'll find in First Samuel chapter 15 verse 2, and this, look, you find here, whoever strikes his male or female servant, this is Exodus chapter 21 verse 20, whoever strikes his male or female servant with a staff, and if they have died by his hands, he shall be guilty of a crime. But if he survives for 1 day or two, he shall not be subject to punishment because it is his money.
This is
you see, if he beats him so badly, that he doesn't survive, he doesn't get any crime because it is his money. This is the heart of objectification, of commodification, of all the things that you're accusing Islam of. You have no answer, my friend, to the emancipatory discourse that we find in Surah Al-Balad chapter number 90, and the fact that freeing slaves was something which is in the zakat obligatory. Also, you'll find in chapter number 24 verse 33 that it's mentioned mukataba. And mukataba is the idea of somebody comes who is enslaved, and according to one opinion, according to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, that they have to be freed. If they say we want to ransom ourselves, they're enslaved. So in other words, the so-called master, you have to be freed. So that's another thing you can bring.
Time. All right, Muhammad is repeating his same erroneous points again. Who is Mohammed Hijab? Let's ask that simple question. His own scholar, Islamic scholar, says Mohammed Hijab is an infidel. Why do I say this? Because his own Islamic scholar, Sheikh Saleh Al-Fawzan, says slavery is part of Islam. Slavery is part of Islam. Slavery is part of jihad, and jihad will remain as long as there is Islam. So slavery is part of Islam, slavery is part of jihad, and jihad will remain as long as there is Islam. And he goes on to say,
it sounds like good.
He goes on to say, they are ignorant. People like Mohammed Hijab here, who think slavery, Islamic slavery, has been abolished, are ignorant. They are not scholars. He said of people who express such opinions, they are merely writers. Whoever says such things is an infidel. Why does Mohammed Hijab say what he says at Hyde Park? Because he knows he can't say what this gentleman said from Saudi Arabia in a nation like ours. He knows it. If he says what he says from Saudi Arabia, he knows Islam would not spread even the tiny little bit it is attempting to do now. And that is why he doesn't do it. And that is why the Saudi Arabian Sheikh calls him an infidel. What do we find? He said Bilal was a black guy and treated with great respect. Bilal said to Abu Bakr, my dear friend, Sahih al-Bukhari says, 557.99, it says, Bilal, even up to the time of Abu Bakr, remained a slave. And that is very important for you to know. I don't care what he did. I don't care if he called people to pray. I don't care if he sung a few songs or any of those things. The question is, how did Muhammad treat him? Muhammad treated Bilal as a slave. So continued Abu Bakr. Muhammad was quite happy with this. He was quite happy with slaves continuing as slaves until the end of Islam, which is the end of times according to Islam, according to Muhammad Hijab and any other knowledgeable Muslim. So the problem is this. In Islam, blacks, unbelievers, especially women, are treated in a bad way. They are seen as cattle, pigs, all sorts of derogatory terms. This resulted in harsh treatments of sex torture. Female slaves were tortured. Quran Surah 4:24, Quran Surah 4 verse 3, Surah 4 Ayah 29 and so on. Please answer, Muhammad, if the Quran says that Muslims can take any of the captive women who their right hands possess and have sex with them at any stage, any stage. Do you agree with this? If you had a wife who is a non-Muslim, and if Muslims were to get hold of her and say, she is my captive, I can do what I want to do with her, will you be happy? I'm assuming you won't be. And therefore, you need to agree, Islam does terrible things with slaves.
I'm assuming.
Like I said earlier, Bilal, manumission, a great one of 5 pillars according to Muhammad. The problem, like I said earlier, Surah Sahih al-Bukhari 3:765, Sahih al-Bukhari 5:57.99, both of them are against this. Slaves were asked to continue as slaves.
Alright, let's one more each, yeah? We don't want to spend like another 2 hours. I think it's settled after all.
Okay,
really. I'm gonna say this again. I have one, then you have one, and then I finish because you started. Okay?
Yes. So so you. Yeah.
I'm gonna speak, then you, then I conclude, and then that's it. Yeah?
Okay.
Alright. What's that? 2 rounds each?
No, one more.
Right.
Yeah.
So 424. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Where does it say you can have sex with slaves at any time and all this stuff that you're talking about? It doesn't say that at all. All it says is that you're not allowed to marry a woman who's married except what your right hand possesses. What your right hand possesses doesn't mean that you can have sex with them whenever you want. In fact, the idea of raping a woman, whether she is a slave or whether she's a wife, has been spoken about by the Salaf of this ummah or the predecessors. Shafi'i mentions it in Kitab al-Umm. Even Imam Malik mentions it, and the punishment of it is a corporal punishment, something like whipping and so on and so forth. So this is not something that Islam endorses at all. And the evidence of that is the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad where he says, La darar wa la dirar. You can't harm or reciprocate harm. How can you rape a woman, whoever she may be, in Islam without causing harm? So this is something that is completely falsehood, and it's